Welcome back to the Fantasy Baseball Cafe podcast. I'm your host, as always, Josh Shepherdson. You can follow me on Twitter, where I tweet about baseball, football, other sports, nonsense, beer drinking, music, you name it, under @Beachhead50. And today we're going to discuss relief pitchers and my rankings on FantasyBaseballCafe.com. As you know, relievers are a volatile bunch, and overturn at the closer role for teams is pretty much commonplace year to year. It happens often. Understanding who the best options are at the position is kind of necessary, and understanding who might be flying below the radar and could scoop up some saves as the season wears on is equally important, because not everybody's willing to pay the exorbitant prices of the reliable studs at the position. And knowing who the middle tier and lower tier options, the handcuffs, those sort of things, those are going to help win you some leagues this year as you try to scoop up some saves here. So without further ado, we're going to move on to my rankings that are headlined by Cincinnati Reds closer Aroldis Chapman. The lefty posted ridiculous numbers last year: 0.89 FIP, 0.83 WHIP, struck out 52.5% of the batters he faced last year, which is just obscene. Nobody else was even close to him. The biggest issue with him is control at times. Had a 11.9% walk rate. If you're not ranking him atop your closer rankings, that's likely the reason why. I love the strikeout upside, though. He's going to have a long leash. And despite the scare the other day when he left the game early, he's not injured. There was some miscommunication with the Reds, according to the organization themselves. He's just fine. He sits atop my rankings. He's going to cost you an early pick, but if you want a reliable reliever that's going to give you a monstrous strikeout total, go ahead and pony up for Aroldis Chapman. I know a number of experts are comfortable rolling with cheaper starting pitching just to get a guy like Aroldis Chapman in the earlier rounds, and I think that strategy has some viability. So Aroldis Chapman tops my list. He's followed very closely by Atlanta Braves closer Craig Kimbrell. Craig Kimbrell's elite, 1.83 FIP, 0.91 WHIP, 38.9% strikeout rate. Walk rate was up last year to 10.7%, but it's been lower than that in the past. Continues to miss bats. One of the best in the business. Problem is he's saddled with a bad Braves team this year. Closers are going to get saves on bad teams too, but the fact that the Braves don't project to win as many games could hurt his save total. Not enough to drop him out of my second ranking. I think the strikeouts are going to be there. The ratio, elite ratios. Plus, they're going to get enough saves from him. He saved 47 games last year. I'd expect him to save upwards of 40 plus again this year. He's a stud. If you feel comfortable with a longer track record, maybe a little bit better control, you can bump Kimbrell up to 1. I would have no problem with that. I prefer Chapman's strikeout upside slightly. Number 3 is Greg Holland, and he rounds out this trio of elite closers in a tier of their own, basically. He had a 1.83 FIP, which matched Craig Kimbrell last year, 0.91 WHIP, which also matched Craig Kimbrell. Slightly lower strikeout rate, but when you're striking out 37.5% of the batters you face, you're doing pretty darn well. Walked the fewest batters of this group of elite closers, with just an 8.3% walk rate. Saved 46 games last year. The Royals look a little worse on paper than they did last year, but they should still be a team that is around 500, maybe slightly better. So he'll get his save chances. Might save a few more games than the two in front of him, because he's backed by a slightly better team, but it should be fairly close. They should all be within a handful of saves of one another. And while he has great relievers behind him and Wade Davis and Calvin Herrera, among others, he's in no danger of losing his job. I mean, this trio is about as safe as they come. They're going to miss a bunch of bats, going to really anchor your whip and FIP from the relief pitching positions as best as you could hope for. And they're going to be great for offsetting some lower strikeout starters. You might be targeting a guy like Dallas Keuchel. It is great to pair with these elite relievers. So they are in a class of their own. Checking in behind them in a tier lower is David Robertson, the Chicago White Sox, formerly of the New York Yankees. 2.68 FIP last year, 1.06 WHIP, 37.1% strikeout rate, decent ground ball rate at 44.2%, which is important to note because he does trade one homer-friendly ballpark for another, moving from Yankee Stadium to U.S. Cellular Field in Chicago. The offense is revamped there. They should win some games this year. They project to be over 500, should get some plenty of save opportunities. Mark Melancon checks in fifth, 209 FIP last year, .87 whip. 25.6% strikeout rate is much lower than the other closers in front of him, but the reason he can get away with that is because he keeps the ball on the ground at an obscene rate. 57.4% ground ball rate, saved 33 games last year in Pittsburgh. He's now their full-time closer, unquestioned closer. He does have the potential to miss a few more bats, also has the potential to induce a few more ground balls. He was over 60% in 2013. We're talking about an elite closer here, going to help your ratios. Probably doesn't have the strikeout potential of the guys in front of him, but great ballpark to pitch in. Above average team in the Pirates they should finish above 500. So again, another guy that's going to get some save opportunities, long leash, nobody pressing him for his job. Number 6 is Cody Allen. Cody Allen took the job from John Axford last year and never looked back. 299 FIP, 106 whip. 32.6% strikeout rate. The one bugaboo in his statistical profile is he does give up some fly balls and he does pitch in a ballpark that does amplify home run hitting. So you're going to want to be cognizant of the fact that Allen could string together a few blown saves with some unfortunate home run per fly ball luck if that were to rear its ugly head, but nobody's pressing him for his job. He's about as safe as they come, and he's an elite closer that won't cost the price of some of the elite closers in front of him. Number 7 is Trevor Rosenthal, 299 FIP last year, but his whip ballooned to 141. Explanation for that's real simple. 13.6% walk rate. He did only post a 6.4% walk rate in 2013. Hasn't really ever had any problems with control in the past, so I do expect him to shave that walk rate down to under 10% again, which will pair nicely with the 28.3% strikeout rate from last year. Big electric arm. Also a guy who pitches for a very good team. The Cardinals project to be the best team in the National League Central. Gonna get some save opportunities. One name that's removed from the bullpen mix is Carlos Martinez, who's been named the 5th starter. So any concerns of maybe Rosenthal slipping up and ceding his closing role to equally electric-armed and young Carlos Martinez should go ahead and be washed away now. I don't think most people were super concerned with that, but it is a little bit comforting to know that Martinez is going to be opening the year in the rotation, won't be serving as like the 7th or 8th inning guy for Rosenthal, waiting in the wings if Rosenthal's walk issues rear their ugly head early in the season. But like I said, I do expect him to shave that walk rate down substantially. So moving on is number 8, Koji Uehara. Koji Uehara is dealing with some hamstring issues, going to open the year on the disabled list, but manager John Farrell did express that he expects Uehara to be back by mid-April. Not a guy that's dealing with an elbow or a shoulder injury, so I'm not concerned. If he misses 2 weeks of the season, so be it. Still going to be a top 10 reliever for me. Pitching for a revamped Boston squad that should contend for the American League East crown and provide him plenty of save chances. 309 FIP last year, .92 whip. That .92 whip comes courtesy in large part of a dental floss thin 3.2% walk rate. That low walk rate doesn't come with a low strikeout rate, folks. 32.1% strikeout rate. Koji Uehara is an elite reliever. He does occasionally deal with some injuries, so that puts him a little bit behind the other elite relievers in front of him. In fact, he's going to miss a couple weeks. Hurts a little bit too. I certainly wouldn't draft him ahead of the 7 that I have listed before him. Hence his ranking, but he is a guy that is still a top 10 closer for me. And if people are going to be scared off in drafts because of the hamstring injury, reap the rewards by scooping up Uehara as your RP1. Number 9 is Dellin Betances. He's a guy that's going to move down a little bit in my forthcoming updated rankings by position. His waning velocity in the spring is what worries me a bit. He's not operating with the upper 90s fastball that he was throwing last year, sitting more around the mid 90s. I believe 94 is what I was reading as his max velo and where he's been sitting in spring starts, in spring appearances, I should say. If it's enough to move him down the draft rankings a bit, in your leagues, definitely take advantage of scooping him up. Yes, the velocity worries me a little bit. Yes, the fact that Andrew Miller could actually open the year as the closer worries me some. This is a guy that still posted a 164 FIP last year, .78 whip, 39.6% strikeout rate, and just a 7.0% walk rate. He's an elite reliever who is going to get some saves this year. Whether he is the sole closer, whether he shares the closer job with Andrew Miller, as long as that velocity returns, which I would expect. It's still very early in the spring. I'm not going overboard with the diminished velocity. He's a guy that's going to help you a great deal on ratios, going to boost your strikeout rate, and you can live with a few less saves if he's going to continue to dominate the way that he has, the way that I expect him to when that velo comes back. But do have to ding him a little bit since it does look like Miller is a legitimate threat at this point to save some games. Probably closer to a top 15 closer as opposed to a top 10 closer at this point, or I should say relief pitcher, since we don't know that he is in fact the closer for the club yet. Number 10 is Joaquin Benoit for me. 2.32 FIP last year, 0.77 WHIP, 31.2% strikeout rate, pairs nicely with a 6.8% walk rate. The only problem with Joaquin Benoit, and it is worth noting, he's only eclipsed 70 innings pitched one time since 2010. He does battle some injuries. Big bat misser when he's on the hill. Pitches in a very pitcher-friendly ballpark at Petco Park. The new look Padres offense should score some runs, put the Padres in position to finish at or above 500 this year, which means saves for Benoit. He is part of a loaded bullpen, though, so if he does falter, maybe the leash is a little shorter than it should be for an elite reliever like Benoit. When you got guys like Kevin Quackenbush, Brandon Moore, and others, Nick Vincent, for instance, who are backing him, you've got some competition if you string together some poor starts, but I'm not worried about Benoit right out of the gate. I think he's a fantastic reliever, and if he's your RP1, you're doing just fine. Number 11 is Glenn Perkins of the Minnesota Twins. 3.10 FIP last year, 1.18 WHIP, 25.4% strikeout rates, a little bit below some of the names in front of him, but he does help offset that with just a 4.2% walk rate. He doesn't have anybody pressing him in the Minnesota Twins bullpen for his job. Another guy with a long leash. The only thing that could ever realistically change his closer role, barring Tom Wilhelmsen-like meltdown of a couple seasons ago, would be being dealt. I mean, the Twins are a team that does project to finish under 500. They don't project to contend for the division, but there's no reason to speculate that he would be dealt. So feel good about Glenn Perkins. Again, another guy that if you don't want to pony up for the elite arms at the relief position, this is a nice tier to dip into with Benoit and Perkins and others, where you can feel really good and really comfortable with your RP1. Number 12, Steve Cishek of the Marlins. Brilliant last year. 2.17 FIP, 1.21 WHIP, 30.6% K rate is up from 26.3% in 2013, but the strikeout rate came with a big drop in ground ball percentage from 53.1% to 42.7%. The reason's simple. Relied less on his fastball, leaned heavily on the slider. Slider's going to miss more bats, going to also coax more fly balls, so fine when he's at home. His ballpark suppresses home runs a great deal, but some road venues could pose some hazards for him if he's going to continue to lean on the slider heavily. Could lead to some gopher balls. I do worry about a slight regression to the strikeout rate since we don't know how the league is going to do seeing that slider more this year. The other concern with Cishek is the increased slider usage. We know that slider usage tends to be tied to elbow injuries. Granted, he's not working as much as a starting pitcher, so the concern should be significantly less than that of a starter using a slider a ton, but it is at least there for me. He's pitching for a good Marlins team. He ranks in the top 15 of closers for good reason, but I have a hard time moving him into the top 10 based on a couple of red flags that I see in his profile. But he's right there. Again, really good RP2 or RP1, probably a guy that's going to be drafted a little bit ahead of where I would like to select him based on other expert rankings, but Cishek's very good RP1 if you can get him at the right price. Number 13 is Houston Street. A little different than the closers in front of him. 2.80 FIP, 0.94 WHIP, but just 24.9% strikeout rate. Not a big velo guy anymore. And the biggest knock on him, like Benoit, is health. The former Padre, coincidentally, has just one season of 60 innings pitched since 2009, or has not eclipsed 60 innings pitched since 2009. So you do have to dock him for his health concerns. He's going to miss time. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion. Death, taxes, and Houston Street serving a DL stint. But Houston Street is very good when he's out there. He's pitching for a loaded Angels team, an Angels team that dealt Kevin Jepsen, so there's less competition for that closer role should Houston Street go through a rough patch. But healthy Houston Street's good. Problem is you got to dock him a little bit for not always being a healthy Houston Street. Number 14 is Fernando Rodney of the Seattle Mariners. 2.83 FIP last year, 134 WHIP. First year was a success with the Mariners, 26.6% strikeout rate, but 9.8% walk rate. A little bit alarming when you got a closer flirting with that 10% walk rate, unless you're in the Craig Kimbrell or Aroldis Chapman category of blowing everyone away. Getting around that 10% mark gets a little bit hazardous for closers' health. 12.4% walk rate in 2013. So we're talking about a guy that we know has some control issues throughout his career. He scares me a little bit, but he can still miss bats, and the walk rate improvement does at least bode well for continued success. Just beware, if you grab Rodney, you might want to grab a slightly stronger RP2 if he's going to be your RP1. Anytime you deal with a guy with control concerns, I do always have that thought in the back of my mind that they could just lose it. And maybe that's slightly irrational, but I think it is something to keep an eye on. But Rodney's going to be closing for a very good Seattle Mariners team that could contend for that American League West. Going to win a lot of games. Going to give him some save opportunities. Jonathan Papelbon is ranked 15th, and while his velocity isn't what it was in his peak years, he's still doing a fantastic job. Posted a 2.53 FIP last year, 0.91 WHIP or 0.90 WHIP, 2.43, 24.3% strikeout rate. Decent strikeout rate, not his heyday strikeout rate, but walks very few hitters, 5.8% walk rate. Biggest knock on Papelbon, he's on a rebuilding Phillies squad that would like nothing more than to deal him if they can find a taker, either a taker for his full salary or they can get a decent prospect back if they eat some of his salary. Papelbon's threat of being dealt is reason for concern. If he's dealt to a situation where he sets up, then obviously his value plummets because you're drafting him for saves primarily. If he moves to another club where he can close, the concern is mitigated a great deal. You'd think that teams that are looking to contend would be the ones that would be most interested in Papelbon, probably clubs looking to fill a closer vacancy, but you never know. Somebody may, with a big salary, maybe I'll throw a speculative name out there. Maybe the Dodgers decide that, hey, we'll eat that salary because we can. Kenley Jansen's out for a bit. Let's get a replacement in there that's better than what we have. If that were to be the case, that would be disastrous for Papelbon's value. So you do need to understand that he is on the trading block, and the trade could cripple his value. Drew Storen checks in 16th. 2.71 FIP last year, 0.98 WHIP, 20.5% strikeout rate, 4.9% walk rate. Probably would rank a little higher for me if he didn't have a disastrous 2013 that resulted in him getting demoted to the minors. He's not that far removed from struggling, but he no longer has Tyler Clippard to compete with in that bullpen for saves. So Storen does get a little bit longer leash as a result. Just misses out on the top half of the closers here, but he's right there. He's not far off. I definitely prefer him as an RP2 to my RP1, but if you want to take a different approach and perhaps grab a few more relievers and grab from that middle tier, Storen's a decent anchor. He's going to be pitching for a Nationals team that's going to win a ton of games. Missed some time with a blister on his foot this spring recently, so don't be concerned when you see that he's not throwing. It's not an elbow, it's not a shoulder, it's a toe, it's a blister on his foot. He'll be fine. Number 17 is Francisco Rodriguez of the Milwaukee Brewers. 4.50 FIP last year, but don't read too much into that. He did have some home run struggles. 2.91 xFIP, which normalizes home run rate. Does a better job of reflecting how he pitched last year. 0.91 WHIP, 28.2% strikeout rate, 6.7% walk rate. No longer the curveball slider pitcher, depending on how you want to classify that pitch. Really leans on his changeup now. Can miss some bats. Velocity's down from his peak years, but he's aging well. The Brewers brought him back to be their closer. They do have some other options there if he falters, but they didn't pony up for him to not close for them. So I do feel like he has a fairly lengthy leash for a guy that ranks outside the top 15, and I do like Francisco Rodriguez. Do beware that his ERA could be closer to the the mid threes if he continues to struggle with home run issues. And Miller Park isn't exactly the most favorable ballpark for guys with home run issues, but should continue to miss bats, should keep the whip low, and should save games as a closer who has a fairly long leash. Hector Rondon checks in 18th of the Chicago Cubs. He'd rank much higher based on just his numbers. My biggest concern with Rondon is he has dealt with arm issues in the past, and he's part of a loaded Cubs bullpen that features Neil Ramirez, Pedro Strop, and also added Jason Mott this offseason. So you've got some guys waiting in the wings. The Cubs are in contention now. A couple ugly appearances. Maybe Joe Maddon's not willing to overlook that. Maybe he moves on to a committee. Who knows? From a statistical standpoint, though, Rondon was brilliant last year. 2.26 FIP, 1.06 WHIP, 24.7% strikeout rate, and 5.9% walk rate. So he's a guy that I like as a high upside RP2. If he holds that job all year, he will outperform his rank. But I do have some concerns about some other very talented relievers in the Chicago Cubs bullpen. That's why he barely cracks the top 20 for me. Number 19 is Zach Britton of the Baltimore Orioles. Thrived last year moving to the closer role and looks to have a firm grip on that. 3.13 FIP. 75.3% ground ball rate. No, that's not me reading a typo. That is an accurate reflection of his ground ball rate last year. He's a very difficult pitcher to lift the ball on. His sinker is a fantastic pitch that is one of those bowling ball sinkers as it's described, and it just gets pounded into the ground. Because he leaned on that more heavily than his slider, just a 21.8% strikeout rate, 0.90 whip. My biggest knock on Britton is the reliance on his ground ball and the fact that means he's relying on his fielders. He does have good fielders behind him, but anytime you're dealing with batted balls, you deal with the vagaries of that ball finding a hole and basically ending up getting hit where they ain't, as they say. So Britton leaves his luck up to chance a little bit more by not punching out as many hitters. If he were to lean on his slider a little bit more this year, see his strikeout rate go up, perhaps at the cost of his ground ball rate a little bit, that would actually be preferred in my book. So monitor his pitch usage early. He is a very good SP relief pitcher too, and he should have a fairly long leash. The Orioles do have Tommy Hunter in their bullpen, who was their closer to start last year, but they're not in a hurry to yank Britton from that role. I do think he keeps the job all year, but do beware anytime that a pitcher does rely so heavily on batted balls like Britton did last year, you do have some reason to at least give pause. Number 20 is Neftali Feliz. He had a 4.90 FIP last year, 0.98 whip. Don't read too much into his FIP. He's a guy that throughout his career has posted huge infield fly ball percentages on his batted balls. It looks like it's very legit. I don't know how he's coaxing them. Perhaps he does a fantastic job of jamming hitters, but we've got a big enough sample that I would say it's fairly legitimate. We're not talking about some kind of one-year sample size fluke. His velo did climb as the year went on last year. I think Feliz is a closer who's on the rise as his fastball velocity continues to increase, further removed from Tommy John surgery. And don't beware too much of the FIP. Just recognize why it's higher than one might expect. The batted ball data definitely throws FIP a little bit of a loop. He should have a fairly firm grasp on the closer role for the Texas Rangers, but the Rangers are not a very good club this year. That could hurt his save chances, but as I said earlier in the podcast, and I'll repeat here, even bad teams are going to provide saves for their closers, and the Rangers will do that for Feliz. Number 21 is Addison Reed of the Arizona Diamondbacks. He maintains that he's going to be healthy for opening day. That's good news. His 4.03 FIP is not good news. Struggled with home runs last year. Really, that could be problematic as a closer who goes a handful of appearances with with giving up the long ball can choke away some saves and can open the door to other relievers. The Diamondbacks have a number of players vying for their starting rotation. Young pitchers who simply aren't going to make the rotation might end up in the bullpen. Reed could have some competition if he does struggle at some point. There's talk that Archie Bradley could actually begin the year in the Diamondbacks bullpen, which seems crazy for a rebuilding team that should continue to develop him as a starter. Maybe they want to get him a taste of the big leagues in the bullpen. They wouldn't be the first team that's done that. Johan Santana with the Twins actually immediately comes to mind. A more recent example, Carlos Martinez, who's now the 5th starter for the Cardinals, also comes to mind. If Bradley opens the year in the big leagues as a reliever, I wouldn't expect him to immediately be thrust into high leverage situations, but boy, oh boy, does he have the power arsenal to give Addison Reed a run for his closer money if Reed were to struggle with the homer ball just a little bit. But on the good side of things for Reed, does miss a lot of bats, 27.4% strikeout rate. You can certainly do worse as your RP2. Just beware. It's a bad Diamondbacks team. It's going to struggle to win a lot of games, and he could eventually have some competition for that closer spot. 22nd is Kenley Jansen. Jansen would rank a lot higher if he wasn't due to miss the first month, possibly month and change of the season. Jansen just had his walking boot removed. We're dealing with a foot injury as opposed to elbow and shoulder, which again makes a big deal. Makes a big difference when you're determining where to rank relievers. Not a concern for me long-term health-wise. 191 FIP last year, 113 WHIP, 37.7% strikeout rate, 7.1% walk rate. Closing for a very good Dodgers team. Nobody that's filling in for him currently is the type of reliever that could steal that job, Wally Pip him, so to speak. Kenley Jansen will get that closer role back when he is healthy and will be elite. I prefer drafting Jansen in head-to-head leagues, especially if you can stash him on a disabled list spot. But in roto leagues, there is some merit to drafting him. Just understand that you're going to get a few less saves as a result of him starting the season on the disabled list. And the other reason that I rank him outside the top 20, and while I say it's great that it's just a foot injury, anytime you're dealing with an injury, there's always that possibility that there's a minor setback. And I just don't like taking on that risk in roto leagues where you need essentially every save you can get. In head-to-head leagues, if he suffers a setback, not a big deal. He's already on your disabled list. You need him come the second half of the season when you're making your postseason run. Not as big of a deal at all. Rank Jansen about 5 to 10 spots higher if you're in a head-to-head league. But roto leagues, 22 feels fair, and that's what I had in mind when I ranked him. 23 is Sean Doolittle. Guy who should be ready by the end of April at the latest, but he's a guy that's dealing with a partially torn rotator cuff. I'm a little bit concerned with that. I mean, anytime you're dealing with the shoulder, it's more alarming than the elbow, and it's certainly more alarming than a lower body injury. Doolittle was awesome last year, though. 171 FIP, 0.73 WHIP, 37.7% strikeout rate, 3.4% walk rate. So he should be back after the first few weeks. If he stays true to that time frame, whoever drafts him in this range is going to get a steal. But beware, Doolittle's going to have some competition for that position, perhaps. More on that competition a little bit later in the podcast. But Doolittle, great reliever. If not for the shoulder concerns, he would rank substantially higher. If you're willing to roll the dice a little bit, Doolittle makes for a very good gamble here. 24th is another injured closer, Jake McGee. 173 FIP last year, 0.90 WHIP, 32.9% strikeout rate, 5.8% walk rate. Expects to be out for April. He's throwing already. By the time he gets back in May, he should reclaim the closer role. New manager Kevin Cash has said that he plans to go to a closer by committee after initially saying that Brad Boxberger would be the guy to absorb the bulk of saves. The Rays do have some talented arms, namely Boxberger and Kevin Jepson, who, if they were to succeed in the closer role, maybe wrestle away the committee job for themselves, could make it difficult for McGee to reclaim his stake as a closer. Could push McGee into a left-handed reliever, high leverage lefty situation, which may actually be more beneficial for the Rays anyway, since they do have a couple of very good right-handed pitchers. But I'm not ready to write off McGee yet, and if he does come back and close for the club, then you're going to be getting a really good pitcher come May. Again, a guy that I feel more comfortable drafting in head-to-head leagues than Roto, because you can stick him in that on that DL, and you can have him when it counts towards the second half of the season or early summer, whenever he gets back, if he were to have any setbacks. So I do feel good with McGee as a DL stash candidate and a very good reliever in head-to-head leagues. A little less so in Roto leagues, but if you're going to roll the dice, this is a good reliever to roll the dice on. Luke Gregerson was officially named the closer for the Houston Astros on Tuesday. He checks in 25th, 3.24 FIP, 101 whip, 52.2% ground ball rate, which will play very well at Minute Maid Park, since Minute Maid Park is notorious for enhancing home run hitting. Just 20.8% strikeout rate. Gregerson is a slider specialist. Very good relief pitcher. Better as an RP2 or RP3 than being leaned on as your RP1, as that Astros bullpen does have some guys who could press him for that job this season if he does falter a little bit. Brett Cecil checks in 26, 234 FIP, 137 whip last year. That 137 whip in large part due to an 11.5% walk rate. You can live with the walks if you're going to miss bats at the rate that he does. 32.5% strikeout rate. Also keeps the ball on the ground a great deal. 53.8% ground ball rate last year. He has been named the closer for the Blue Jays. Blue Jays are going to keep Aaron Sanchez stretched out because that rotation was dealt a big blow with Marcus Stroman being lost for the season. So less competition in that bullpen for him. Cecil gets a slightly longer leash as a result. They did keep some other rookie pitchers who throw hard, probably going to be used in low leverage situations. But anytime you get some exciting young arms in that bullpen, you do have to kind of acknowledge that they're there, but I don't see them pressing Cecil for the closer job right away. In fact, if Cecil gets off to a good start, there's no reason to think that he'll cede that job. But again, 137 whip is a little bit alarming. It's going to allow base runners. It could result in some blown saves and could muddy things just a little bit. But Cecil's a really high upside RP3 or RP2. The bat missing is really what catches my eye. 27 is Ken Giles of the Philadelphia Phillies. 134 FIP last year, 0.79 whip, 38.6% strikeout rate, and just a 6.6% walk rate. Velo's down this spring, but I'm not super concerned. The club held him out yesterday or removed him from his appearance. I'm not sure which, due to a sore middle lower back. Again, doesn't look like it's an arm or shoulder issue. I would expect once he's fully healthy, you'll see that fastball really cranking up near triple digits again. And Giles is really that closer in waiting when Papelbon is eventually moved. And in the meantime, you're going to get elite ratios. You're going to get big strikeout totals from him. Not a bad guy to just draft and use for that. But the fact that he should eventually be closing this year is really why you want to draft him inside the top 30 relievers. He's a guy that could catapult into the top 5 in relief once he does claim that closer job. I Bobby Parnell ranked 28th, and he pitched in a minor league game already at this point. Should be back sometime in April. He's simply put a better reliever than Henry Mejia when both are healthy. That doesn't mean that he'll get his job back right away. Could end up co-closing with Henry Mejia. Could end up setting him up. This is where you get into the dicey closer situations. But I like Parnell's underlying stats more than I like Henry Mejia's, and that's why he ranks 28th. 29th is Joe Nathan. He looks like a guy that's on the verge of giving up his closer job in Detroit. 3.94 FIP, 153 whip, 20.9% strikeout rate, 11.2% walk rate last year. The only reason he ranks inside the top 30 for me, he's pitching for a very good Tigers team. Brad Ausmus was willing to continue to give him the ball in safe situations last year, despite the presence of some other options there. He may have a slightly longer leash than he should. He a closer at some point. You get a closer this year in the job. All it takes is him staying together half dozen, earn himself a little long leash than he deserves. But Nathan cracks the top 30. He's the reliever that I would prefer to avoid. Santiago, I'm not enamored with. Last year, 0.86 whip. The strikeout on a batter, 20.6%. any 6.9% walk rate. I'm leery of the next guy on this, number 1, Sergio Romo, reclaiming his closer job. Casillas wrestled it away from him last year when Romo was struggling with home runs. Romo's 3.94 FIP is higher than Casillas last year, as is his .95 WHIP, but he does a better job of missing bats, 25.7% strikeout rate, does a better job of limiting walks, 5.2% walk rate, and he did ink a substantial 2-year contract with the Giants. That doesn't necessarily mean that he'll get the job, but they did make a financial commitment to him, so they do believe in him. I believe the deal is 2 years and $8 million, so we're not talking about pennies here. I do think he eventually overtakes Casilla for that closer job, and even if he doesn't, I think Romo's going to absorb some of the saves from Casilla. I don't think he's going to be your standard get every save opportunity closer. I think that they will turn to Romo some, which ultimately hurts Casilla's value. 32 is Tyler Clippard, and I alluded to a player giving Sean Doolittle a run for his money for the closer position. Well, that's Tyler Clippard, who was acquired from the Washington Nationals. 2.75 FIP last year, 1.00 WHIP, 29.5% strikeout rate, 8.3% walk rate. He does have a history of saving games, so I mean he has that closer. That magic juju that some managers tend to like. I mean, I don't necessarily think Bob Melvin is one of those closers, but it doesn't hurt. He's games before. If he gets off to a hot start, it's not entirely out of the question that Melvin continues to stick with Clippard in the 9th inning, uses Doolittle as his high leverage lefty in the 8th inning, or even uses the two interchangeably in the 8th and 9th inning. I wouldn't be shocked if a progressive team like the Athletics was willing to do a co-closer situation where you have your lefty closer and you have your righty closer in Doolittle and Clippard. I mean, look at all the platoons that they implement in their lineup. This is a team that really gets the most out of their roster. So Clippard is a very good reliever to have, and one that I really like. I'll be likely targeting in a few drafts that I still have to do. LaTroy Hawkins is the last of the full-time closers. He's retiring at the end of the season. He's pitching for the Rockies. 3.39 FIP, 1.20 WHIP. He is unlike any other closer on this list in that he strikes out very few hitters. 14.2% strikeout rate, 5.8% walk rate, only does so much to offset that low strikeout rate. 46.7% ground ball rate is not as high as I'd like to see at Coors Field, since Coors Field is a home run hitter's paradise. It's also great for hitting doubles and triples. So LaTroy Hawkins is a dangerous closer in my opinion, based on his environment, based on the fact that he relies on contact so much, based on the fact that he's retiring at the end of the season. The Rockies do not project to be in it. When they're out of it, at some point you have to figure that they're going to look at a younger arm in that closer role, determine if they have a closer on board or if they maybe need to invest in one via trade or free agency in the offseason. So I don't think Hawkins keeps the job all year. If you want some early season saves, no fault with taking Hawkins, but just understand what you're in for. 34 is Henry Mejia. As I noted before, I don't believe he's as good of a relief pitcher as Bobby Parnell. If he does have some clean save appearances early in the season, though, it might not matter. He may be able to retain that job. Does have the added benefit of being starter pitcher eligible in leagues where if you're looking to get an extra reliever and want to slot him as an SP, definitely helps his value. As a reliever last year, he posted 5 FIP, 1.42 WHIP, 24.3% strikeout rate, 8.5% walk rate, and 49.1% ground ball rate. Love the fact that he keeps the ball on the ground. Strikeout rate's okay. Walk rate's a little high. Not sure why he struggled with his allowing base runners by hit. Bad luck. Maybe he was getting too much plate. We'll get a better idea of that as the sample size grows. I do think he's eventually supplanted as the closer by Bobby Parnell, but he is the guy that should get the first save opportunities while Parnell is recovering from Tommy John surgery and recovering from a hamstring injury this spring. Your 35th ranked reliever is Joakim Soria, the Detroit Tigers. He's the guy that I expect to eventually overtake Joe Nathan. Would probably rank a little higher if Bruce Rondon was not also in that bullpen. Rondon throws very hard. Could also enter the mix if or perhaps more likely when Joe Nathan fumbles away his job. But Soria is the guy that you should be banking on. He's the primary handcuff here. 2.09 FIP, .99 whip, 26.4% strikeout rate, 3.3% walk rate, and 43.2% ground ball rate last year between the Tigers and the Rangers. Should be a good source of saves eventually, I would imagine. Good speculative grab for drafters who don't want to pony up for closers right out of the gate. Grab a Soria, let him help your ratios early in the season, and keep your fingers crossed that Nathan does what we expect Nathan to do, and that's fumble the closer job. Wade Davis ranks 36. He's really no threat to Greg Holland for the closer job, but he is an elite reliever in his own right. Gave up 0 home runs last year. Not going to do that again, or at least is very highly unlikely to do that again. If he does once again allow 0 home runs and pitches a full season, not that he would need it, but I would suggest buying a Powerball ticket, because that's the type of luck that you just can't expect to be repeated. But with a 119 FIP, 0.85 WHIP, 39.1% strikeout rate, 8.2% walk rate, and 47.6% ground ball rate. He doesn't have to give up 0 home runs to be a great reliever for those that are looking for a boost to their ratios, for those looking to get a relief pitcher to offset some of these low strikeout ground ball starters. Davis is your guy. He would also become an elite closer if, heaven forbid, Greg Holland were to surgery. Davis would immediately be a top 5 closer. 37 is Andrew Miller, and he will probably move up my rankings, since it does look like he's going to have a very real shot at saving some games for the Yankees this year. 151 FIP last year, 0.80 WHIP, 42.6% strikeout rate, which is just insane. The lefty did very well against right-handed batters too, so you don't have to worry about any struggles there. 70% walk rate, so wasn't dealing with walks last year. The former highly touted starting pitching prospect has just thrived as a reliever. Miller is an elite ratios booster, could save some games, and if he does run away with the closer job and Betances ends up serving as a multi-inning reliever, the 8th inning guy, Miller immediately becomes another guy that would have his hat in the ring for that top 5 relief pitcher ranking. 38th is a guy that I talked about a little bit earlier in the podcast, Neil Ramirez, part of a loaded Cubs bullpen, but he was brilliant, and I think he would be the first reliever to get a crack if Hector Rondon were to be displaced as the closer. Ramirez had a 2.61 FIP last year, 1.05 WHIP, 29.9% strikeout rate, and a 9.6% walkout rate. Can really miss bats. Very good reliever. Brad Boxberger's 39. 2.84 FIP last year, 0.84 WHIP, 42.1% strikeout rate, and 8.1% walk rate. If he runs away with this closer job, 39th is going to look like a really low ranking. It'll look like I underranked him. But the fact that Kevin Cash is going with this ridiculous bullpen closer by committee situation does alarm me a little bit. And I say ridiculous, but if I'm a fan of the Rays, I'm a fan of them not committing to their best reliever as their closer. It's better to have a guy like that available to pitch in high leverage situations when they arise anytime after the 7th inning. Saving a guy to preserve a 3-run lead in the 9th inning is far less important than having him get you out of a bases loaded jam up by 2 with an out in the 7th inning. So the progressive thinking is good for Rays fans, not so good for fantasy owners. But Brad Boxberger is draftable anyways in large mixed leagues and AL only formats. In fact, I would draft him early. I would draft him in standard mixed leagues and try and absorb some saves early in the season and hope that he runs away with the job. But even if he only gets a handful of saves, he's going to help you in the ratios, going to help you in strikeout rate. Great option in roto leagues where you've got the innings pitched limits. Again, great to pair with some of these lower strikeout Dallas Keuchels of the world. 40th is a guy that I have ranked higher than my fantasy peers pros, who fantasy peers experts have Mr. Moore ranked 85th. That's the expert consensus rank. I have him ranked there as 45th. The rankings there also include non-closing starting pitchers with relief pitcher eligibility, hence the difference in my ranking 40th among true relievers and 45th among all relief eligible pitchers at Fantasy Pros. Point being, Moore was a revelation as a relief pitcher last year. Struggled mightily as a starter, but in relief, 1.85 FIP, 0.96 WHIP, 25.3% strikeout rate, just a tiny 3.3% walk rate. His stuff played up huge in the bullpen. Went from throwing into the low mid 90s as a starter to hitting the mid to upper 90s as a reliever. Also used his slider more heavily. He looks great. He's another guy starting pitcher eligible. So if you're looking for a guy that you can get some ratio help from and plop in an SP slot on your team, if you're in a holds league especially, and you want to kind of juke the system, get a relief pitcher and a starting pitcher slot, Brandon Moore is your guy. I really like Brandon Moore this year. Quickly, I'll mention that the guy that I have ranked notably lower than my than the expert consensus at Fantasy Pros is Santiago Casilla. I have him ranked 34th. The expert consensus is 26th. As I mentioned, I do think Romo is going to siphon some saves away from him, and I do think Romo is actually going to overtake him as the closer at some point this year. So if you're grabbing Casilla, you're really only grabbing him for his saves. He's not a great source of strikeouts. The whip probably going to come up just a little bit. So you really need Casilla to hold that job if he's going to justify being his expert consensus rank of 26. This is going to do it for the Fantasy Rankings podcast. I will be doing some more podcasts throughout the year, so stay tuned. But thank you for joining me for the Rankings podcast. I hope you enjoyed them. Get on FantasyBaseballCafe.com. We've got some great content going up from team previews power rankings by Brad Johnson that are almost concluded, to my rankings, Dollars rankings, and some standalone articles as well. And the forums are kicking. Get on there and start chatting with some fantasy baseball folks. Until next time, take care.